Well, hi everybody. Welcome to the show. I'm going to remind everybody up front, and also I'll remind you multiple times until the end of the show that just like my other two live streams that I did this week, my regular Facepalm 5 on Monday, and then the impromptu Star Trek comic making stream that I did on Wednesday, this is going to be a fundraiser for the Bail Project. So, and I saw some random geek has already donated. So thank you very much, geek, for donating. Super chats will go straight to the Bail Project for this live stream. So if you want to donate to the Bail Project, please do so by donating through the live chat. Those of you who are watching this live, and if you're watching this later, after the live stream is over, you can still donate via the donate button in the little donate box that is next to or below the video on the YouTube page. If you have a question in the live chat that you want me to answer or something you want me to respond to, please hold on to that until I get through the patron questions. But if you want to donate to the Bail Project at any point, please do so. And I will check back after I get through the patron questions, and I will read out the names of everybody who has donated to recognize you, because I think it's really cool that people donate to charity through my live streams. And I really wanted to raise some money for the Bail Project this week, because the Bail Project pays legal fees for people who, particularly in the last few weeks, people who have been arrested at protests. And I think that's really important and really necessary. So, and if you don't want to give to the Bail Project, there is also a fundraiser being held currently for Black Lives Matter DC that is linked in the description of this video that you can contribute to as well, that I would love to encourage you to do. And then our friend Some Random Geek has also put together a Google Doc of charity links for individuals that we know that need some help, and for various other charitable causes. And that is linked in the description as well. So basically, I'm saying, if you're feeling charitable, if you're feeling benevolent, and you can afford to donate something to charity during this live stream, please do so. Don't wait until I am paying attention to the live chat. I will come back and catch up with everybody who does it for the Bail Project, because that is the official linked fundraiser. And yeah, that's it. So now I will turn to the patron questions, and when I get through those, we'll turn back to the live chat, and hopefully we'll raise some money and have some fun. So let's see what is going on with my questions from my wonderful Patreon patrons. First up is a question from Some Random Geek, who says, "Let me start with a quote from Ursula K. Le Guin. What is an anarchist? One who, choosing, accepts the responsibility of choice." And that speaks volumes to me, because anarchists see a lot of coercive, unjustifiable hierarchies in many places. Much how when Anita Sarkeesian first got into feminism, she was like, everything is sexist, everything is racist, and you have to point it out. I sometimes feel like that as an anarchist. There are coercive, unjustifiable hierarchies everywhere, and we have to dismantle them all. But by accepting the responsibility of choice, anarchists can't say, not my problem, or not my department, or don't blame me, I voted for Kodos. And yes, that was a Simpsons reference in the last one. Plus, in taking back power from the bosses and the elite ruling class, in dismantling capitalism, the state, and their police force, taking back power from cis-hetero, patriarchal, white supremacist, ableist, imperialist, colonialist capitalism, the responsibility is back to the community. We're already seeing that in Minneapolis, with the community already distributing food and even reusing vacant hotels to house the homeless. That's the problem with anarchism. It will take a lot of work. Workers in Catalonia in 1936 would work 10, 12, sometimes 16-hour days during the Catalonia anarchist Spanish Revolution. They were also at war. It is not as easy as voting for someone to do governance for you and not have to worry about those things until the next election. But I think the work will be worth it to have full emancipation and autonomy to organize ourselves and our community with free association and with no coercion and no unjustifiable hierarchies. I could ask you for your thoughts, but I have a better question. Steve, are you Antifa? And what do you call those folks who are against Antifa? The anti-Antifa? And how come no one told me that professional anarchist is a thing? That should be me. Yeah, that's a good. Yeah, that's true. They're calling the protesters professional anarchists, aren't they? Yeah. Well, it's kind of like I said during the during, I think it was during the Facepalm 5 when I was talking about the protesters and how they're looking for the leaders of Antifa, and I was like, most people who have been involved in Antifa activities, not everybody certainly, but a lot of people, most people that I know personally, are anarchists, and anarchists are not are not defined by their hierarchies. Like, anarchists don't like hierarchies. They don't. I mean, they don't like coercive hierarchies, and they're not the group that is like, let's choose a leader. That's just not. So it's a fundamental misunderstanding of what it even is. But yes, of course I'm Antifa. Antifa stands for anti-fascist, and of course I'm anti-fascist. And what do you call someone who is anti-fascist? Well, you do a little math. You reduce the equation. The two antis cancel each other out. So you're left with a fascist. That's what an anti-Antifa is. It's a fascist. And of course, I'm not a fascist. I would never want to be thought of as one. Of course, I'm anti-fascist. Any sensible person, regardless of your political philosophy, whether you are an anarchist or a statist, whether you consider yourself a liberal or a progressive, or even if you consider yourself a conservative, you should be anti-fascism, right? Like, how, I don't understand how anti-fascism has become. I mean, I do understand it because the people in charge of the executive branch of the federal government are fascists, whether they call themselves or not, whether they even realize themselves that that's what they are or not, that's what they are. So, I mean, I understand why it's happening, but the fact that you could actually say, our enemies are anti-fascists, and that's just a thing that we just sort of absorb. Like, journalists will just report on it. Oh yeah, Trump says that the enemy is anti-fascists. Like, that's just a thing now. That's just a thing that the president said, and it barely made a ripple because of all the other incredibly fucked up things that he said and done. So yeah. Yes, of course I'm Antifa. Of course I'm anti-fascist, and everyone else should be. If someone is uncomfortable saying that they oppose fascism, I would seriously consider whether or not I want to hang around that person. Next question is from Patrick Simpson. Hi, Steve. New Patreon follower here. While I know just now there's more going on that's more important than this particular question, it popped into my head while watching your video on Star Trek Parents. Do you think that while creating DS9, they used the opportunity to create Jake Sisko and his close relationship with his father as a reply to TNG's Captain Picard, who pointedly directed his life away from parenting and his at least initial difficulties dealing with a ship which had so many children on board? While he did eventually turn into somewhat of a father figure for Wesley Crusher, and we see how much he came to care about his nephew and how the later loss of his brother and his nephew truly affected him during generations, he always had a certain amount of reticence when it came to children, though I think he grew out of that somewhat in the intervening years between TNG and Picard. Anyway, thanks for the content. I'm making my way through all of it. I hope that things in America will be able to grow from the protests which have been going on, and wish you well in getting rid of the orange menace sitting in the bunker at the White House. The UK stands with you against the injustices that are going on still in both our countries. Well, thank you very much for that bit at the end, especially, and I really appreciate hearing that, as I think a lot of my fellow Americans do. We appreciate knowing that things are messed up in other countries, not just ours. It's weirdly comforting to us. And we also really appreciate knowing that there are good people standing with us, outside of our borders who are looking in and can see what is happening and see what is wrong, and know that the people protesting, the people standing up against it, are on the right side. And the people vilifying the protesters and taking the side of the police who are attacking them without justification, that they're on the wrong side. So that means a lot to me, and I think it means a lot to many of my fellow Americans. So I really appreciate you saying that. And I don't know if Sisko and Jake, if that relationship was created necessarily as a response to Picard not having kids, but I do think it was probably a conscious decision because it was a way to make Sisko different, and it was a way to make Deep Space Nine different from TNG, which I think was very much a goal of the creators of Deep Space Nine from the beginning. I think it's very intentional, all of the ways that Deep Space Nine differs from TNG at every level of the conception of the series, from the premise to the setting, to the characters, the way the characters interact with each other. And yes, Sisko as a father, and being a father in the present moment, raising his son as we are watching the show, that is a big departure from not just Picard, but from Kirk as well. To have an active parent, a person who is parenting a child, a teenager, as the show progresses, is something that Star Trek had never quite really attempted before. In a lead character, we'd seen Beverly as Wesley's mom in TNG, but Beverly was part of the ensemble. Sisko was the lead character, and his relationship with Jake was very central, very important to the show. So yeah, I don't know if it was necessarily intended to be a response to Picard, but it was intended to differentiate Sisko from other heroes, from other lead protagonists that the show had before. And of course, I mean, I think it was very successful in that, because I think the Ben Sisko, Jake Sisko relationship was wonderful, and I think Sisko overall became a fantastic character. Next question is from Bush. Hi, Steve. My spouse and I just moved to this country before the COVID-19 lockdown, and now there's this widespread dystopian police violence at our doorstep. Is there a message here? Should we leave? I would hate to tell you to leave, because I feel like we need all the help we can get. I don't want to say like, no, you should leave. But I mean, well, look, the thing is, like, the police violence has been going on for a very long time. It's just in the last few weeks, it has become a lot more blatant and undeniable than it was before. I mean, it's one thing, like, if you're gonna, if people were gonna take the pro-police side before, you know, they could, there were a couple of points that they could always retreat to, and the points were bullshit. It always boiled down to like authoritarianism and racism for the most part. But there were points that they could sort of retreat to and say like, oh, the protesters started it, they were being violent first, or you know, if black people just wouldn't commit so many crimes, then police wouldn't have to, you know, deal with them on a disproportionately larger scale or whatever. But now, if you want to take the pro-police side, you have to ignore or try to justify all of these incidents that we have on tape from all across the country of police using force on protesters who were not doing anything to threaten them, who were not being violent, who were not being disorderly, who in some cases weren't, it's not even clear if they were even part of the protest. Like the police like pepper spraying people who were just standing on the sidewalk or breaking into people's cars because they were out past curfew. And it's like they were out, it was a few minutes after the curfew went into effect, and they were probably on their way home. And the police are stopping their car and breaking their windows and dragging people. I mean, it's like, so you can't deny that is, I mean, you can deny it, but then you're showing everybody who you are. You know, like, it's completely without justification. It's completely without justification. I was talking to a friend of mine earlier who lives in Minneapolis, and she was talking about a friend of hers they were both like doing things to support the protesters, going, you know, delivering supplies to first aid tents and stuff like that. And there were incidents of the police attacking and destroying first aid tents and pepper spraying medics who were in the process of helping protesters who had been injured. You can't even do that in a war. Like, you're not even allowed to, soldiers know that you're not supposed to shoot the medics. The medics are neutral. You're not supposed to shoot the medics. You're not supposed to fuck with the medics at all. That's during a war. So the police in the United States are like, no, let's fuck up some medics. Like, I mean, it's so far beyond the pale. It's so far beyond deniability that I mean, it seems like, you know, especially maybe to someone who just arrived here, you might think like, oh shit, we just moved here and now this all started. It got a lot worse and a lot more visible recently, but it's, you know, these underlying issues that are driving this, especially in terms of police overreach and police brutality. have been around for a very, very long time. So what I'm saying is, no, you shouldn't. You shouldn't leave. You should stay. And it really wouldn't have made much of a difference whether you moved in just recently or whether you had moved in, 5, 10, 15 years ago. The problems that we're experiencing now would still have been there because they're very old problems that we have just refused to deal with. Next question is from Eric Braun. Hi, Steve. Thank you for your thoughts and insights on Star Trek in all its forms, and also the Star Wars franchise. What are some of your impressions of some other sci-fi properties like Babylon 5, The Expanse, or Stargate? Well, I can tell you about Babylon 5 because I watched it in its entirety when it was originally airing, but I haven't watched it since, so I'm just going from memory. But I liked it. I mean, I liked it a lot when it was on. Obviously, it didn't leave as much of an impression on me as Star Trek because I haven't gone back and rewatched it since. But I really liked it when it was on at the time. And I've seen a little tiny bit of Stargate SG-1. I don't think I've ever seen the movie. I haven't seen the movie, but I've seen a little tiny bit of Stargate SG-1, and I thought it was good. I enjoyed it. It's one of those things, kind of like Firefly, where like I started watching it and I thought, oh, this is really good. I could get into this, and then I just kind of put it down and never picked it back up. So it's not. I haven't watched it for a while, not because I didn't enjoy it, just because I never went back to it. But maybe I will someday. And I've never watched The Expanse. So I can't give you an opinion on that. But yeah, I really, really enjoyed Babylon 5 at the time. I haven't revisited it since. And what little tiny bit of Stargate that I have seen, I've also enjoyed. Next question is from Danny K. Hi, Steve. If you had the opportunity to design your own Federation starship, how would you go about it? What would its primary function be? Research, transportation of people or goods, blowing the crap out of Borg cubes? Thank you, and have a good day. Probably not. I mean, it's weird. Like, my favorite ship, or one of my favorite ships in the franchise is the Defiant, which canonically was designed to blow the crap out of Borg ships. So it's weird what I'm about to say. I would not design my ship to blow the crap out of Borg ships because that's like the least interesting part of Star Trek to me. I don't see it as like a war franchise or a battle story, even though there have been some great war stories and some great battle stories in Star Trek. But I'm not like particularly taken by the, blow the crap out of stuff. So it wouldn't be that. I don't know. It would probably be like an exploratory vessel. It would be something where the mission was to seek out new life and new civilizations. Like, I would love to do a show or at least establish like a core of Starfleet where their primary mission was to do the original mission from the original series, to seek out new life and new civilizations, but to do it in a responsible, respectful way, to do it in a way that where it wasn't like classic Trek where they were stopping at a planet every week and basically completely destabilizing their society and then just moving on to the next planet. Like, I'd want to really think about it as a writer and as like, how would an institution like Starfleet go about doing this in a responsible way so you could expand the range of knowledge of the people of the Federation while also respecting the cultures of the people you would encounter. And if I could figure that out, I would love for the show to be about exploration, and therefore the ship would be an exploratory vessel. So it would probably be smaller than, the Enterprises. It probably wouldn't be as small as the Defiant, but it would be a relatively small vessel with a small crew of people who are specializing in things like first contact procedures and cultural research and stuff like that. And hopefully the drama of the show would come from these interactions with new people and the conflicts and the problems and the opportunities to learn that would come from that. As for what would the ship look like, how fast would it be, I have no idea. But I'm attracted to the idea of let's do a show about exploration, about where the ship is designed and is given the mission to go out into unexplored territory and meet new people. Dr. Babylon. Some random geek has repeatedly used your channel as a platform to advocate political violence. He wants his calls for violent revolution to be taken seriously enough for people to be persuaded by them, or at least so he can plant a seed. But if you find what he's saying offensive or repulsive, he'll chastise you for taking it seriously and try to defend it as just a joke or a shitpost. Sometimes he even undercut that defense by saying something like, seriously, though, we're running out of time to stop global warming, so we need to start building those guillotines. The first time I pointed out the contradiction and how he wants his agitprop to be received and told him he didn't get to have it both ways, he responded by calling me a bootlicker. These days, he switched tactics to being vague most of the time. He's directly admitted this is because he fears the legal consequences associated with conspiracy to overthrow the government. I understand why he'd want to maintain plausible deniability, but he goes about it in the most bizarrely lazy ways imaginable. That's not really a question. I mean, I get the feeling that you're kind of venting. And I will say this, because I like you both. I like you, Dr. Babylon, and I like some random geek. And I am a little tired of you guys fighting about this on my Patreon page. So if you want to continue arguing with each other about this, maybe argue with each other somewhere else, would be my request. I'm not putting like an ultimatum. I'm not saying like, or you don't get to be my patrons anymore or whatever. I'm just saying as a personal request, because I'm honestly tired of seeing the two of you at each other, picking at each other. So like, go fight with each other somewhere else, and just, don't talk to each other on my Patreon page if you can't get along, because it's really getting old. And I say that I say that in friendship to you both. I think when Geek says something like, seriously though, we're running out of time to stop global warming, so we need to start building those guillotines. Maybe I'm wrong, but I take that as a joke too. I mean, obviously the bit about global warming is not a joke. Obviously, global warming is an incredibly pressing concern, but the bit about let's start building those guillotines, I don't take that necessarily as, let's start executing people. I take that as a way of communicating that drastic action is needed, but maybe I'm misinterpreting, or maybe I am taking a too kind of a read on that because I like him and I want to give him the benefit of the doubt. I honestly can't. I don't remember ever seeing something that Geek has written on one of my posts or on anything of mine that I thought was legitimately calling for political violence. In fact, I find Geek to be more laid back than a lot of anarchists that I am aware of. I've known a lot of anarchists who are completely uncompromising on the point of violent political revolution. Like Geek has repeatedly said that while he does advocate for revolution, he also believes that people should go vote as a form of harm reduction, and believes in trying to engage with the system as productively as possible while, the revolutionary work is still being done or still being prepared for. So, I mean, he's not nearly as strident or as extreme as other anarchists that I am aware of who are absolutely unwilling to listen to anything other than, like overt support for violently overthrowing the government. So I feel like, again, I feel there's a lot of animus between the two of you, and I'll say this for Geek too. Sometimes Geek comes across as way too strident, and I thought it was a little harsh when he called you a bootlicker. I did see that post. I'm not an anarchist, so I can't tell them what they should be calling people or whatever. It's not my thing. I didn't think it was fair to call you a bootlicker. Or to say that you're, to suggest that like you're a fascist or you're supporting fascism or what. I don't think he ever actually did that, but so I just, I would just really, really like it if you would just stop fighting with each other on my Patreon page. And I think you both have valid points against each other, and I also think you have both treated each other a little bit unfairly. And that's all I'm going to say about it, because I feel like I'm having to parent, and I didn't want kids because I didn't want to have to do that. So that's all I'm going to say about it. Next question is from John Gingras. Hi, Steve. As always, I wish the best for you and yours. with these new Star Trek shows springing up, I've been thinking about casts and characters. I'm kind of hoping to see a cool Bolian character at some point. I don't think we've seen many over the years. What is a Star Trek race that you'd like to see represented as part of the main cast of one of these shows? Well, if we're talking Strange New Worlds, I mean, you know, it would be nice to see maybe, I think I've mentioned this before from you know, the animated series, like someone of Lieutenant Eric's species, or someone of Lieutenant Moressa's species, a Cation. Or I mean, Bolians are cool. They have a cool character design with like the blue and the bald heads. I think that's really cool. That would be nice to see. Or maybe some of the a Tellarite or an Andorian, you know, some of the original sort of founding members of the Federation. Like, it would be cool to have like a Tellarite could be interesting, because Tellarites supposedly are very grumpy and very argumentative and very sort of foul tempered. So if there was like a Tellarite crew member on Captain Pike's Enterprise like that, I feel like there would be potential there for story and conflict. So yeah, maybe I'll go with maybe a Tellarite. You know, because we don't really see them very often. We've seen them a little. We saw them a little bit in Classic Trek. We saw them a little bit in Enterprise. I think there might have been one or two that we saw on Discovery, maybe in the first season. I think. I don't know, but we haven't seen a lot of the Tellarites, and supposedly they're like a really, really important power in the Federation. So let's, you know, bring on the Tellarites, please. Adrian Martin, hi Steve. Looking back to Star Trek TNG, I've always had a stick in my craw about the end of the Most Toys. I can definitely see Data rationalizing murdering Kivas Fajo, as terrifying as that is, but how was he able to lie to Commander Riker about firing the weapon? I'm sure the writers went that direction to screw with our heads, but haven't been able to come up with an explanation. Thanks, and be well. Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on how literal you're taking it. I view that as Data sort of transcending his programming. I view that as Data proving Fajo wrong, not just because Fajo said, you know, you won't murder me. It's not in your programming. You're not capable of it. And then Data kills him. He proves him wrong. He kills him. And then he lies to Commander Riker. And yeah, he's not supposed to be able to do that either, but that's a very human thing to do. And that is Data sort of demonstrating that he is more human than Fajo thought he was, that he is capable of making those leaps, of making those decisions that may be contrary to his ethical program, but are the kinds of things that a human being would do. You know, so that's how I read that. Now, do we see evidence later in the show that Data isn't supposed to be able to do that? Yeah, I think when Data starts experiencing like immoral thoughts or immoral urges or feels pleasure at killing someone in the first part of Descent at the end of season 6, it's treated as like a big deal, because Data's like, I shouldn't be able to do this. You know, I shouldn't be able to, you know, I like this isn't something that I should be capable of. But we've seen that he's capable of it at least a little bit in the Most Toys. So I take it as that. As I think most people who watch my Star Trek videos a lot know, I really don't get tangled up in issues of canon or continuity. If Data shows himself able to lie in the Most Toys, and then in another episode, you know, later on, it's established that, oh, actually he can't lie, it's against his ethical program, that doesn't cross me up that much. I'm not really bothered by it. I think the point made in the Most Toys is that Data is capable of transcending his programming and of acting, at least in some circumstances, in a way that a human being or a non-android person would act. Next question is from Josh Colson. Hey, Steve, my favorite Trek race is the Bajorans. I love their spirituality and the fact that their gods are aliens and their culture. I had a huge crush on Ro Laren and Kira as a kid. What is your favorite race and why? Other than human, because I would have to say human is my favorite. I don't know. I mean, I really liked the Klingons when TNG was sort of fleshing out the Klingons. I liked the Ferengi in DS9 for the same reason, because DS9 was able to sort of build them out and show us their culture, and also make them really funny and like really bitingly satirical and sarcastic, which I enjoyed a great deal. So it changes from time to time, but thinking about it now, I might say the Ferengi, particularly from Deep Space Nine. I think they come across as a really interesting group, and were put to good use because they were such a wonderful, biting satire of the excesses of capitalism at a time when we really needed to hear that message, and of course we still do. But yeah, I think I would say the Ferengi. Isaiah Taylor. Oh, Steve, I feel better. I see the waves of humanity supporting us from around the world. They see the things we go through and they don't like it. I see a full wealth of my white brothers and sisters who are standing with us in these difficult times. People are standing with us from around the world. We have a chance now to change things. I know previously that I've had a dark view on humanity and a negative attitude, but now I'm seeing it differently. Maybe our species is worth saving. There is more good in the world than bad. I see that now. Too bad it took me this long to figure that out. On the other hand, I have rescinded my consideration for joining the Air Force due to the current situation, as I will not commit acts of violence on my own citizens. I'm now applying for a film school in the Orlando area. I'm so happy to hear this. You mentioned this in the chat of I think of the Facepalm 5 earlier this week, and I said it to you then, and I'll say it again. I'm really happy for you. I think it's a good decision. I mean, I would have supported you if you had decided to go into the military, because like I told you at the time, like I've known people who have done it who feel like it's their best option, and I don't judge people for that. But I'm really happy, and I'm happy mostly that you are feeling heartened by the positive things that are going on, because I am too. It's there are two sides of it. It's on the one hand, what is happening now really, really depresses me. But then on the other hand, I see the response to it. I see the people in the streets. I see people around the world protesting in solidarity and also protesting their own issues. Like everybody protesting outside of the United States is not just protesting in solidarity with us. They have their own problems in their societies that they are protesting against. But there's a feeling of solidarity around the world of people finally recognizing that things are fundamentally wrong and that they need to be reformed. They need to be changed. And that does give me hope, as it does you. So I'm glad that you have found that hope and found that reason to be optimistic. And it gives me the same feeling. It really does. When I see the protesters and I see people supporting the protesters and I see the tide starting to turn in favor of the protesters in terms of politics and in terms of media and the way it's depicted in on the news. And I mean, it's not drastic, and there are still obviously a lot of really, really fucked up depictions of protesters and a lot of damaging assumptions made about them, and everything isn't all better by a long shot, but it's moving in that direction a little bit. And I'm very heartened to see that, and I really, really hope that it continues, because there's a lot that needs to change. And yeah, I'm glad that you feel better. I'm glad that you feel better, and it's cool that you're going to film school. That's awesome. In a few years, you're going to know more about it than I do, because I never actually went to film school. So that's exciting. That's really exciting. I'm really happy for you. Plasma Burn Death. Hi, Steve. First time I've been able to become a Patreon member for anyone, and you are the first. Wow, thanks for that. Hopefully, this won't be too much for one video. First, I worry there might be action by Trump Bar to try to outlaw or limit how many people can be bailed out from any account or person from the various bail funds. Just want to get that out there. But the main thing I need to vent about, and then there's a link, and it's about the vehicle ramming attack. So why isn't this guy charged with terrorism? Allegedly, deliberate vehicle ramming into crowd of people is a tactic used by terrorists. And since this model of humanity, is a self-admitted leader of a KKK branch, Barr, where are you? Can you imagine if the head of any Antifa organizational chapter did this? We would have troops, detection centers, and full martial law yesterday, with Trump appointed emergency high chancellor for life. Oh, by the way, it's amazing to me how he was shot in the face with rubber bullets, put in a chokehold, beaten with batons, and his head banged on the police door and tear gassed. Oh wait, never mind, silly me. Where could I have gotten that possible approved immunity and automatic authorization of deadly or assault force to counter an immediate threat idea from? Oh, that's right. He and people like him are not who police are worried about. Look at that perfect mugshot. What could be the difference between him and the unarmed minority protesters that have been getting their ass handed to them by police? Maybe the type of car he drove? Nah, couldn't be white privilege. Doesn't exist, per award-winning Medal of Freedom and God-fearing American hero Rush Limbaugh. And Rush would know if white privilege was a thing. And if it is a thing, then we all need to wear white t-shirts, since police respect the fuck out of that shit. Yeah, I mean, you're not really a question, just some venting, but I appreciate it and I understand it. Yeah, you're right. The difference is it's the color of it's skin color. You're right, and the side that they're on, and the fact that when Barr and Trump say we're going to crack down on domestic terrorism, everybody knows they don't mean white supremacists, even though white supremacists are the ones engaging in almost all of the domestic terrorism. That's not what they mean. They're using it as a scare tactic. They're using it as a tactic to scare and to oppress the people that are taking to the streets right now, people of color, particularly black people, but all non-white people, and any other group, any other marginalized group that feels compelled to take to the streets and protest. They're using it as a scare tactic. They're saying, we're going to prosecute you people as terrorists. They're not going to prosecute the actual terrorists who are committing acts of terrorism. They don't care about. No, it's obviously a black and white thing. You've got to complete. You're totally right. It's obviously a black and white thing. What's the difference? The difference is it a white guy or a black guy? If it's a white guy, he's going to get treated much better than if he was a black guy. That's it. And, Bill Barr is never going to say that. He's never going to come out and say, oh, we only care about terrorism if we can blame it on black people. He's not going to say that. But that's the conclusion that I am forced to draw when there are acts of white supremacist terror for years and Republicans never say boo about it. In some cases, they even support it, or they say, oh, we should try to understand why they're so angry. Or Trump says, you should make a deal with these people. These are good people. You should talk to them, make a deal, right? But if black people are just exercising their constitutional rights, oh, they must be terrorists. Yeah, it's obvious what the game is. It's obvious what the game is and what the double standard is. John Burnsy. Hi, Steve. I had posted a different question, but then I got thinking about a few things. During these recent protests, I was reminded of this series of incidents. This was about a Scottish stone that was used by the Scots during the coronation of the Scottish monarchs. But in 1296, Edward I, after a battle, took from them and brought the stone back to England and fitted into his royal chair, so he literally sat on it. Kind of disrespectful. In 1996, it was stolen by some Scottish students and taken back to Scotland, and it was supposedly broken en route. I understand that the first stone might not have been the stone that Edward I took in 1296, but it was at least used at Queen Elizabeth II's coronation in 1953. This symbolism and those comments by quarterback Drew Brees and Denver coach Vic Fangio reminds me of the NFL team, which claims as its host city Washington, D.C., and you know what they use for their nickname. The idea of this as a cultural reference from the capital of the United States makes the NFL and both political parties look very disrespectful towards their indigenous peoples, similar to Edward I and the Scottish people. Full disclosure, I am a Cowboys fan. Anyway, I was thinking about using a different hashtag along with Black Lives Matter. Hashtag all lives cannot matter if red lives do not matter. What do you think? Well, I definitely support the sentiment because, think about it. Like yeah, you're right. The name of the football team in Washington, D.C., the NFL team in Washington, D.C., is an ethnic slur against Native Americans. It's unimaginable that you could do that with you could not try to imagine naming a sports team after an ethnic slur toward Asian people or toward black people or toward another group. But because it has had that name for so long, and because for whatever reason we're just not as aware or as sensitive to offensive language used toward Native Americans, it's been tolerated for years, and there are still people who defend it. There are still people who, if you suggest, maybe that team should change its name, they'll get indignant. They'll get absolutely indignant about it. The idea that as though a sports team has never changed its name before. As though a professional sports team changing its name is just unthinkable. So yeah, of course it's disrespectful, and it's a mark of how little the powers that be in the NFL and everybody, whether they're a person in power or not, everybody who tolerates it and supports it and doesn't support changing the name, how little respect they have for Native Americans. It's despicable. Of course it's deeply disrespectful. It ought to be changed. It's a disgrace that it hasn't been changed. It never should have been called that in the first. They never should have been called that in the first place. Andrew C. Hawkins. There's been a lot of talk about police abolition or defunding in the weeks following the killing of George Floyd. However, when most people speak of that, they don't mean getting rid of all police. Rather, they mean shifting responsibility for public safety to other kinds of specialists. Things like what SRG mentioned last time, unarmed mental health professionals to deal with mental health crises, social workers to deal with homelessness, auto technicians to deal with broken taillights, and so on. Does any of that make you reconsider your view of police abolition? I think it's worth taking a hard position, if only to negotiate when the inevitable backlash comes from cop unions. Also, can we abolish Dick Wolf and his garbage procedurals for promoting a false view of policing? Yeah, and we could also we could give Dick Wolf, put Dick Wolf out to pasture for homogenizing American television to such an egregious extent. I mean, I like a procedural as much as everybody, and I used to watch Law and Order religiously when it was on in the 90s. But I mean, enough is enough, okay? Like we get it, okay? But yeah, look, I am in favor of everything that you said in your question. I think the role of police in society and in the United States should be dramatically less than it is now. I think in situations where a policeman, that is a law enforcement officer, is not required, one should not be dispatched. I agree. It should be, if the situation calls for a social worker or a health professional or a mental health professional or someone to fix a broken tail light, police should not be dispatched. And I mentioned this in a previous stream as well. Like I don't see why every single patrolman or patrol person should be armed, should be carrying a gun. I think if you want to have police, that's great. They shouldn't be given jurisdiction over everything. They should not be the government officers that people are encountering more than anyone else. And I don't think they should be empowered to just turn up with a gun at any scene, whether they think that there's a crime going on or whether they think there's a threat to human life or not. I think that causes way more problems than it solves. Now, if there is a specific situation that calls for an armed response, if there is a specific situation where an armed police officer is required, if there's someone else threatening people's lives, or if there's someone else who has a gun or something and is creating an actual threat, then yeah. But just cops walking around or driving around with guns, I just don't see how that helps anything. In fact, we've seen many cases throughout the history of the United States where it makes things worse, if a cop, for whatever reason, decides to escalate a situation, and we've seen just during these protests, many more instances than I can even count of police escalating situations, of police taking situations that were not violent and provoking them into violence or acting with violence against people who were not being violent. And why do you want those people to have guns? Like the carrying of a gun in and of itself is an escalation. So don't have armed people walking around unless there is a specific reason for it. So yeah, I mean, I don't believe in a complete abolition of police. I don't believe that we should have a society where there are no police officers at all, ever. But I think that their role in society should be drastically reduced. And I think specifically the role in society of armed police officers should be drastically reduced and fundamentally rethought. So that the default police officer that we have in this country is no longer a guy walking around with a fucking gun on his hip. Because I don't think it's necessary. And I think it raises the level of danger when you would think the proper role of a police officer should be to lower that level. You know? So yeah, absolutely. I think we need to have a broader array of people who can respond to problems than just the cops, because clearly the cops are not up to it. David Colby, all right, I've finished writing my Star Trek Buffy the Vampire Slayer story. Go me! My next story, for a writer's work is never done, is called Pax Multi. The premise is simple. It's the far future. Humanity has been at war for generations with the bugs, a race of hideous chitinous horrors controlled by a massive hive mind intelligence. The war has been brutal, with billions of casualties on both sides, planets destroyed, solar systems ruined, but finally, after 2 centuries of war, the bugs have sued for peace. Humanity is too tricky, too stubborn, too tenacious for them to conquer us, and they've had enough. The human race, by this point, is a loose alliance of various nation-states, a dizzying array of anarchist councils, socialist utopias, and capitalist corporate states. Each has its own terms for the peace treaty, but none is as unique as the requirement of the neo-feudal Star Kingdom. Born of an attempt to recreate the splendor of the ancient world, the Star Kingdom is a land of kings and queens, counts and dukes, princes and knights, and their requirement for the peace treaty is as traditional as the rest of their laws. A royal marriage to cement the peace and ensure that their noble family and the bugs remain close together to keep the peace. And thus, our poor main character, the heir apparent to this interstellar kingdom, is sent off to the bug homeworld to begin to court an entire hive mind. Shenanigans ensue. So my question, if you had to date a hive mind, what would your first date choices be? Is it rude to ask your partner to gestate and inhabit a body that has less than 16 legs and 8 eyes? What would your small talk even be about? Is it too soon to kiss on the first date? I think kissing on the first date is fine. I just don't think there should be any cloaca play until at least the third date. That's just my own opinion. That maybe I'm old-fashioned, but I don't think that, I don't think the cloaca should come out until the third date. Maybe I'm a stuffy old-fashioned guy. I don't know. Yeah, I think it's a great idea. As I've said this about your premises when you shared them on the stream a couple of times, David. I think it's oh my God, having a royal marriage where one of the parties being married is a being that lives in a hive mind. That is, so you're basically marrying like the entire species in a sense. That's such a great idea. And I mean, what pickup lines? You couldn't use any pickup lines on them, right? I mean, what pickup line could you use on a person from a hive mind? I don't know, but I don't know. I don't even know what else to say other than I think it's a fantastic idea. And I'm glad that I got to make a really, really filthy cloaca joke. Glenn Helwig, I was fortunate to find a woman to marry that shares my love of Star Trek so many years ago. I'm sorry if this has been asked before, but is your wife as big a fan as you? And what is her favorite Star Trek series and why? I know yours is DS9 as it is mine. Well, actually, my wife is not as big of a Star Trek fan as I am, but she has become something of a fan since we've been together. And I think her favorite series is also Deep Space Nine, and in fact, I think I mentioned this in a couple videos ago, but we're going through and rewatching it again on Netflix for I think the second time from start to finish, but we've also done it a couple times where we like sort of picked up in the middle and watched it to the end. But yeah, we've gone through Deep Space Nine a couple of times, and we're currently near the end of season 2 because we usually watch an episode or 2 a day. And yeah, she loves Deep Space Nine. I love Deep Space Nine. So I think I married the right girl. I don't know if I could marry someone whose favorite was Voyager. I mean, that's just, I mean, you know, you're entitled. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. And of course you're entitled to your opinion and, you know, but I feel like those would be irreconcilable differences, you know? I don't know. I'm kidding. I'm sure. I'm sure I would have a lot of other things in common with someone whose favorite Star Trek was Star Trek Voyager. You know, we could talk about other stuff. You know what I mean? We could talk about other stuff. General Contact Unit problem child. When protesters commit to nonviolence, are they inadvertently protecting the corrupt state power structures they claim to oppose? Right now, I'm about a third of the way through Peter Gelderloo's How Nonviolence Protects the State. The main argument presented at the start of the book is that most of the historical instances that are remembered as successes for nonviolent tactics were nothing of the sort. The state and capital does everything it can, i.e. through both media and direct state oppression, to delegitimize violent tactics for fighting unjust hierarchies, and privileged activists go along with it because they know supporting violence might put themselves in levels of danger they're uncomfortable with. In other words, consciously or not, they're putting their own personal safety above the safety of those they're claiming to nonviolently fight for. At least that's what the book argues. You're way more liberal than both me and Gelderloo, so I wanted to get your thoughts on this. Well, I don't know. I mean, I feel like there might be some strategic value in committing to nonviolence, just so the whoever is on the other side will not see fit to either refuse to negotiate with you or to treat you more harshly. I mean, I do. If the point being made is that, you know, a lot of the examples in history that we sort of chalk up to nonviolent protest were actually helped along by acts of violence or the possibility of violence, then I agree with that completely. I mean, anyone who says, well, violent protest has never accomplished anything, that's just ahistorical. That's not, you know, that's just not true. I don't have the view that like violent protest or violent revolution is the only way forward. That's not what I believe. But to suggest that it has never worked or that it has been proven to be a non-viable means of obtaining progress, that's just not true. It might make some people uncomfortable, but it's just not true that violent protest has never worked. You know, but I do think maybe there's some strategic value in not coming right out and saying, you know, give us what we want or we're going to burn the goddamn city down. You know, however justified you may be in burning the goddamn city down. I think it might be strategically wise to say, no, we don't want to do this violently. We will, you know, we will be nonviolent. Because then it's easier to open a dialogue. Then it's easier to get, you know, through to a point where maybe violence won't get to that point, but I don't know. But I mean, on the point of whether or not violent protest has, I mean, I don't think we can honestly say and be historically accurate if we're going to say that, you know, nonviolent protest has never accomplished anything, because I think clearly there are several times in history when it has. Chris says, Steve, your thoughts, give them to me. Pass any number of weeks with no question occurring, save those deemed unworthy by the cruel pragmatism of my wizened brain elders. They finally suffer one to live. I go to write it down, and suddenly 3 or 4 more pop out from under loose brain rocks and brain baskets, and they're just too cute to bash to death with a brain chair. Later. Steve, when people touch on the legitimacy of Trump's election conversationally, do you ever hear anyone qualify it with mention of the concerted, multi-lobed machinations of Russia to tilt numbers in key districts to his favor? I only ever hear the two things mentioned separately. Did the FBI uncover substantial evidence of tampering with computers in key districts where he ultimately won by razor-thin margins? Or am I confused? Is it because a substantial part of the election tampering involved targeted ads at strategic times, meaning the skew was in the opinions via bad info, not the actual voting-related hardware? Though I thought they had that too. When people speak of how Hillary was defeated because such and such tide of public opinion, and Trump was elected because this, that, and the other disturbing trend in disgruntled Americans, why do I so seldom hear it appended that he is not fucking legitimate? Well, I think... first of all, I agree with you, and I do think if I do hear someone say that Trump is not a legitimately elected president, I do not feel it necessary to correct them. You know, I'm not someone who says, well, you know, he is the legitimate president. You know, I don't feel compelled to do that. But I think one of the reasons why that is not a more popular narrative is because a lot of us, even if we hate Trump, and even if we view him as morally illegitimate, the idea that a foreign power could tamper with our presidential election to the point that it affects the outcome is so upsetting to us, so disturbing to us as Americans, that we just refuse to deal with it, because that is how we as Americans, not all of us obviously, but a lot of us, that's how we prefer to deal with our most serious problems, is to just pretend that they aren't really there. So I think that is why foreign interference in our elections has not been the big story of the last 4 years. Because it definitely happened. Whether you believe that it was successful in tilting things in Trump's direction or not, it definitely happened. And it was not just, you know, one or two things. It was a significant effort. It was a major attempt to influence the result of our presidential election. And the reason why that has not been a major story, I mean, it has been a major story, but it's been one of 50 major stories. The reason it has not been the major story of the last 4 years is because, one, Republicans just don't want to talk about it at all because it makes their guy seem illegitimate. And two, non-Republicans don't like to talk about it because it's just really fucking upsetting and disturbing. It shakes our view of ourselves as a great nation. The Russians could affect our election. And also it makes a lot of us look like fucking rubes, like dupes who saw some Facebook ads and went, well, shit, I'm not voting for her, you know, and let me go vote for Trump, right? It makes us look like easily swayed doofuses, which we are. But we don't like to think of ourselves like that. I certainly don't like to think of myself like that. I mean, I think I do fall into that category quite often, but I don't like to think of myself like that. So we just pretended it didn't happen. So I think that's a big reason why we don't talk about it as much, and why Trump's legitimacy is not called into question in the way that you propose in your question. Because it brings up all kinds of other issues about our vulnerability, about our electoral system, about the legitimacy of the previous election, and we just don't like to talk about it. So we don't talk about it. That's the American way. Nonstop Pop. Hey, Steve, if we were going to be badass vigilante superheroes in the 90s, what would your name be? Mine would be Radicool X. Oh man. And I bet you would have like your own Marvel Comics monthly series with like 3 variant foil covers for the first issue. And yeah. What would my badass vigilante 90s superhero name be? I have no idea. I'm gonna take a pass on that. I have absolutely no idea. This is a question that I should have given some thought to before I started the show, and I just didn't. So I have no idea. And I can only offer you my deepest and humblest apologies. Orion McMurray, hello, sir. I hope you're doing well. I just watched City on the Edge of Forever, and I think that the person that was supposed to kill Mrs. Keeler was probably the man that overloaded the phaser he got from McCoy. Your thoughts? It just made logical sense to me, since that was a change in history that might have caused the issue to begin with. Thank you for reading my question. I think in the version that actually, in the final version, I assume it was just supposed to be the truck driver. I just assumed that Edith was going to, because I think Spock says she was killed in a street accident. I figure, and in the episode, she was crossing the street to go see what was going on across the street with Kirk and Spock and McCoy. But I presumably, she was crossing the street to go back to the rescue mission where she worked. So I presume in the original timeline, she was just crossing the street to get back to the rescue mission, and she didn't see the truck, or the truck didn't see her, and, she got flattened. So I assume it was the truck driver. But actually, the character that overloads the phaser isn't there. There is an interesting history to that character because in the in earlier drafts of the screenplay, that character was a lot more important. In Harlan Ellison's original version, the character that sort of becomes the guy who overloads the phaser, or the closest sort of analog to that character in the original Harlan Ellison version, is a character named Trooper, who was a World War I veteran who was disabled, who had lost, I think he had lost his legs in World War One at Verdun. That was one of his most. That was something that was a line that was associated with him throughout the screenplay. In Ellison's original version, his name was Trooper. He fought at Verdun. And it was one of the sadder parts of the story, as Ellison wrote it, because a trooper was vaporized by a phaser, and then at the end of the episode, when everybody's back and history has been restored, Kirk says to the Guardians of Forever, because in the original story it wasn't a gateway, it was actually three like giant statues that were the Guardians of Forever. And when everything goes back to normal and history has been restored to its previous course, Kirk asks the Guardians, what about Trooper? What about the man who was disintegrated by a phaser? And the Guardians respond, he was negligible. And that's really upsetting to Kirk, because I think later they have one of the last scenes of the show is Kirk and Spock back on the Enterprise, and Kirk is talking to Spock. I think it's in that scene. It's either in that scene or it's on the scene with the Guardians on the planet. But Kirk says, sort of regretfully, bitterly, he says, he fought at Verdun and he was negligible. Like he's so upset by the fact that this person who gave his legs and was a veteran of a terrible war, died a senseless death that he shouldn't have died in the street in New York City, that he had no impact on history at all. It's a very bitter pill for Kirk to swallow. It's one of my favorite parts of that original Ellison screenplay. So that's where that character comes from. So there is an interest, even though I don't think I agree with you that he would have been the guy to kill Edith. There is a really interesting story behind that character and what that character was in earlier drafts of the episode. Shad Sterling, what is with people promoting short, catchy phrases that invite misunderstanding? For example, the regulars here who say, kill all landlords, but, and I'm sure they'll comment if I've got it wrong, they don't mean kill at all. They don't mean kill at all. They don't really mean all, and I don't think they even mean landlords. More widespread is social distancing, which isn't about being socially distant. It's about staying out of each other's potential infection range. And everyone says it's important to stay socially connected, the opposite of distant, while doing so. And now we have the rise of abolish the police, which is about abolishing something and is about changing the police, but is not about abolishing the police. I get that these three-word slogans are catchy, but whatever that's worth seems to be more than counteracted by the misunderstandings they invite. Is it really so bad to use a 5-word phrase like end long-term residential renting, or an 8-word phrase like use unarmed first responders except for violent crime? Why are people promoting misleading catchy slogans over more accurate short descriptions? If we're going to avoid using more than 3 words, maybe we should stick with drop the gop, pronounced like a word rather than spelling it out, which might be an appropriate nickname. I agree with you in terms of discussion, but in terms of slogans, you want to have a phrase that is easy to remember, that is easy to chant if you are in a public demonstration, that sticks in your head. And yes, you're right that it does invite misunderstanding, and it depends a lot on correctly interpreting tone and intention. You have to be able to figure out that when most people who say kill all landlords say that, they aren't literally advocating for the rounding up and execution of all landlords. But if you don't know any better, you might assume that is what they mean. So I get your point about inviting misunderstanding, but ending, no more no more armed first responders except in cases of violent crime is not a catchy slogan. Abolish the police, or it's not just abolish. A lot of people are also saying defund the police, and that's a good one too. And that's actually a little bit more, I think that's a little bit more realistic, and I think it's a little bit more accurate in terms of the goals that are being sought. But I mean, look, also, in fairness to people who say abolish the police, there are some people who literally do mean that, who literally mean get rid of all the police. We don't want any more police, period, right? So some people do literally mean that. A lot of people who say that don't mean it literally, but a lot of people do. So abolish the police might not quite be as good of an example of what you're talking about as you imply. But I mean, I agree with you in terms of the inviting of the misunderstanding, but there are reasons for having catchy 3-word phrases, because they have impact, they're memorable, and they're easy to chant for demonstrations. And there are reasons why people are attracted to those phrases that I think are legitimate. Joe McClory, hi Steve. The day you will be answering this question is June 12th, National Loving Day in the United States, a day that celebrates the 1967 Supreme Court decision that struck down many state laws that banned interracial marriages. A good solid holiday that celebrates the United States becoming a better place. Feel free to take a moment to gush about such a good holiday. Moment over? Okay, time to talk about a shit holiday that is much more celebrated that happens on Sunday, Flag Day, the day we celebrate the Continental Congress deciding what flag to use, and that's all. All snark aside, I really do dislike Flag Day, and not just because it is the Nickelback of holidays. Flag Day and its popularity always drives me crazy because it reminds me of all the ways that far too many Americans put far too much importance into symbols, and how easy we find it to box ourselves and others into groups based on them and make choices because that is what is expected of us. As that group or that other person follows that group, they must be this way. When someone burns or kneels to a flag, it is so easy to decide for yourself what that flag means to you, and so what it must mean to them, and just ignore what they say it means. I guess this is more of a rant than a question, but how do you feel about Flag Day? Harmless barbecue day, or a celebration of putting a symbol before the lives of noble concepts it is meant to represent? Where are you from that they make a big deal out of Flag Day? Because I can't remember anybody around here ever giving half a shit about Flag Day. I mean, I know it's on the calendars and it is an official holiday, but I cannot remember anybody that in my life that I've ever known that ever gave half a fucking shit about Flag Day. I just find that really interesting. But yeah, I agree with you. I don't see why it feels like somebody said, we need another patriotic holiday. And we don't. Trust me, we Americans do not need another patriotic holiday. We just don't need one. In May, we've got Memorial Day. In July, we've got July 4th. That about covers it for the summer. We don't need Flag Day, assuming that people even celebrate, which again, that's news to me if there are people that make like a huge deal about Flag Day. Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's a very silly thing to have a holiday over. And yes, the veneration of the flag itself is ridiculous. Somebody mentioned Drew Brees in a previous question. Drew Brees said when he was asked about protesters and he was asked about Colin Kaepernick taking a knee during the national anthem, and he said, I'm never going to be on the same side as anyone who disrespects the flag. And it's like, so if you think that kneeling in protest of racist police brutality is disrespecting the flag, like, what the fuck do you think that flag even stands for? It doesn't sound like it stands for anything that's worthy of respect. If you can disrespect it by silently, non-violently protesting police brutality and white supremacy, like, how is that disrespecting the flag? So, yeah, I agree with you completely about the shit about the flag. I mean, I think we put way too much emphasis on it. We look at the flag in and of itself as some kind of a holy object, and we don't take into account not just what it stands for, but what it should stand for, what we claim our values are, and whether or not we're actually living them out. You know, so I mean, I agree with everything you're saying. It's news to me that people give a shit about Flag Day. Eddie Stone. Hey, Steve, I hope you're well. Sorry for the misunderstanding around my comment a month or so ago, which led, I think, to you joking about the time and effort you put into regular Trek Actually videos, only to be told it makes no difference and all your videos are loved the same. The word limit on the live chat is not a friend of nuance. Anyway, my question, when did you get into baseball? We don't really have it over here in the UK, so I missed out on it. All I really know about it is that scene in Futurama where they say they jazzed it up, and that the first game in the UK apparently happened in my hometown. But DS9 has always made me wish I knew more. Cisco's passion for the game makes it seem so glamorous, so, I don't know, important, I guess. It always made me feel like I was missing out on something that's really special. That could just be the writing or Avery Brooks' wonderful overacting, but despite being a huge soccer fan, I don't think I could make a case for soccer being as culturally important as baseball seems in DS9. As a side note, in the UK, almost every kid's favorite game to play in PE in school is rounders, which is basically just baseball with a tennis ball instead. It blows my mind that there's no significant baseball circuit in this country when most British kids spent a significant portion of our early lives playing and loving a version of the game. And yet, cricket, a game that I also love, but that can be played for 5 days with no winner, is massive. We're a doomed nation. There's a lot in there that I find really interesting. First of all, no need to apologize for the Trek Actually, Not Actually, Trek Actually thing. As you correctly assumed, I was just joking. It doesn't really bother me. But I appreciate the apology, even though it's not necessary. But yeah, I got into baseball when I was a little kid. I think I remember watching it. I mean, it's as long as I can remember. And I remember the first game I watched from start to finish. I watched with my grandmother, my granny, who passed away in January, and I was maybe 7 or 8, 9 maybe. And I had watched a lot of baseball before them, but I remember that specifically because that was the first game that I watched from the first pitch to the last out. And I was pretty young when I did that, and went and attended live baseball games because we have a team in Hagerstown near here. I went to Hagerstown Suns games as a kid and a teenager with my friends and with my grandparents and stuff like that. So I've been a fan of it my whole life. And it's interesting when you say that, kids in the UK play rounders, but there's not really any baseball fandom to speak of. For many years in the United States, that was how we felt about soccer. And I know soccer is huge in the UK and huge in Europe and huge all over the world, really. And it's become a lot more popular here in the United States in the last 15 or 20 years or so. But it's still not nearly as popular as basketball or football or even baseball, which is declining in popularity. But I don't think soccer is even close to as popular as baseball. But so it's like the reverse. It's like your incredibly popular sport that kids grow up playing here too. Like American kids, soccer is like the most popular sport for kids in school, from elementary school all the way up through high school. Like everybody plays soccer. My high school, I grew up in a very, very small town where the population of the town proper was like 400 people. My high school graduating class was like 100 people. We did not have a school football team, like a gridiron, North American football team. We did not have one. We had a soccer team. And soccer outside of school sports, like it's virtually non-existent. Like is not a major sport in this country. There's Major League Soccer, but it's just not as popular as other major league sports. So yeah, it's like we each play each other's games as kids and then forget about them, and they become, and we glom onto other sports as adults. But yeah, rounders is sort of an ancestor of baseball. Rounders came first. Actually, I think baseball probably one of the popular theories is that baseball evolved from rounders, and from a couple other games too, including cricket. During the colonial period here in the United States, people played rounders, and then the rules sort of were changed a little bit, and over, a couple of decades, it emerged as this new thing that was distinct from rounders and cricket. So yeah, it's I don't know where I was going with that, but yeah, it's interesting that that you guys still play a version of it as kids, and yet it's not popular, whereas we play like your most popular sport or one of your most popular sports, and it's not popular among adults either. Neo-normie UPS man of the apocalypse. Is all blackface really necessary to be removed from sight, as two brilliant BBC shows are no longer available on Netflix? The surreal comedy The Mighty Boosh had the ultra-woke Noel Fielding as the spirit of jazz, a comedic take on the devil, who offers a musician the offer of their soul for a music career, as well as a sea monster called Old Greg, who's based on Rick James of the Funk Generation. Also, the Papa Lasseroux character has got the extremely dark comedy show The League of Gentlemen taken off of Netflix, even though the character is based on when Reese Shearsmith was a student there. Greek landlord kept calling him Dave, and they added horror elements to the portrayal. Really, I understand banning something like, say, Porgy and Bess or Birth of a Nation or even Gone with the Wind, but shouldn't there be some nuance here? Case in point, I hate Nazis, as I was almost raped by two skinheads back in the 90s who mistook me for a girl and then stabbed me in the chest. But I'd never want a total ban on Nazis in cinema, as just films like Downfall, The Producers, and Raiders of the Lost Ark are totally different versions of Nazis, from drama to comedy to action. Is blanket banning things kind of dangerous? Yeah, I get your point. I think there will probably, I think there will probably be a period of adjustment. I think the impulse right now is a good one, and is a positive one, to say let's remove these insensitive depictions that we probably should have been more careful about when they were created. You know, and maybe eventually we can get to a point where we're comfortable adding them back, or looking at them in a different context, and being able to appreciate them on some level, despite the blackface or the other sort of disturbing racist imagery. But right now, I understand it, and like I don't think that, you know, there's any harm in taking them down, taking these depictions out of or off of popular streaming services for a while, you know, until we figure out something more permanent to do with them. And maybe we'll decide that we just want to leave them away, that we just want to leave them on the shelf and not look at them anymore. Or maybe we'll come up with something like what Warner Brothers has done with certain racist Merry Melodies and Looney Tunes shorts from the 30s and 40s, where they have still shown them and released them, you know, included them on video releases on occasion, but they open with a disclaimer that says, you know, these cartoons were created in a previous time and they contain racist depictions that were wrong and should not have been a part of the work, but they're here and we're presenting them in their original context because we feel like, you know, we don't want to pretend that this never happened, you know, but we're also adding this message to acknowledge it and to put it in a proper context. And so that you don't think that we're saying that this is okay. Maybe something like that. You know, but I feel like we're in a period where, and it's probably going to last for a while, where we're trying to figure out what to do, you know? So, yeah, but, you know, I understand what you're saying, but I feel like it's probably for the best right now, you know, if we sort of err on the side of sensitivity for once. Okay, this one, here we go. Jin Hi, Steve Shives, I'm sorry if you get this all the time, but would you please rap my Ice Cube It Was a Good Day parody of Chief O'Brien that takes place after Treachery, Faith, and the Great River? Just ask your audience to play the song instrumental themselves in the background. I assure you this is a great career move. Meanie Shives 2020. I'm pretty sure Colin Meanie would not want me as his running mate. Okay, I'm going to do this, but it's going to be terrible. And those of you who have a copy of It Was a Good Day handy, please do not play it while I do this, because I guarantee you I'm going to be completely off the beat. I've actually listened to that. It had been years since I heard that song. I listened to that song like 3 times today, just so I could get somewhere in my head of like, oh God, what's the rhythm even sound? So I'm going to do this. And thankfully, Jin Hai has only written one verse. He hasn't gone through and rewritten the whole song. So this is one verse of a song to the tune of It Was a Good Day by Ice Cube about Chief O'Brien in the aftermath of the episode Treachery, Faith, and the Great River. And it's going to be terrible. My flow is shit. But I'm going to give this my best shot. Okay. Wake up in the morning, gotta thank the prophets. So glad I got the desk back in Cisco's office. No expository personal log, no bad dialogue. Just gave my authorization code to Nog. Have faith in what the great river provides. A blood wine vintage with more likes than Steve Shives. It can be treacherous, like the Alamo in Texas, or glorious as Keiko replicating Irish breakfast. Fix the defiance so the gravity ain't broke. And if I hit the switch, I can make that ass cloak. Still sailing the river with grace and skill. Even scored a role in The Englishman Who Went Up a Hill. DS9 storyline is about Bajar independence. So why the fuck do I got a total recall prison sentence? Life wasn't hard time on the next generation. Now it's worse than a rap song by a Patreon patron. Get me in a holosuite, but remember I'm a little older. Last week kayaked around and dislocated a shoulder. It's okay, it was better with a hypo spray. I gotta suffer, but today was a good day. God, I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. But there you go, Jen. I do not think that was a good career move, but you got what you wanted. So thank you for being a patron, if you still are one. Okay, 2 more questions. First, from Francois Lacombe. How happy are you that Trump's campaign appears to be in a death spiral? Super happy. I hope that's what's happening, and I hope it sticks. Like, I hope it is a death spiral. Hope he doesn't come out of it. Yeah, super happy. Thrilled. Couldn't be happier. And last question from Philip Boylard, a light note. Have you ever thought to make any other Trek baseball caps, like the Pike City Pioneers or the Logicians? Yes, and it's so weird because I was thinking about this independently the other day. Before you posted your question, before I saw your question, I thought, I should, one of these days I should get myself a Pike City Pioneers cap, because I got my Niners cap that I wear for my Trek Actually videos. I got my Niners shirt that I'm wearing right now. But yeah, I would love to have a Pike City Pioneers cap, because I feel like that's even more of like a nerdy inside reference, So yeah, yeah, for sure. I have thought about it, for sure. Definitely. 100%. All right, that's it for the patron questions. So now I will turn to the live chat. And the first thing I see is John Burns saying, Steve impersonating Ice Cube is giving me Vogon poetry reading flashbacks. You're goddamn right. Of course it is. Because it was terrible. Why would anybody want me to do that? I have no rhythm. I have no flow. I'm not a fucking MC. But I did it. God damn it. And I did it, and I crossed my legs, and I pulled my earbuds out. Yeah, I did it, so, whatever. Let me go back and check and see if there have been any further donations. There have been. Oh, wow, you all are the best. Okay, so let me remind, I'm going to go through and read off the donations that have happened while I was answering patron questions. And I'll urge anybody who hasn't donated. Joe McClure says, will I tweet to Ice Cube that I am sorry without context? Yes, for sure. I'm going to read out the people who have donated since I started the patron questions, and then but I would encourage anybody who hasn't donated either to the Bail Project or to Black Lives Matter, which is linked in the description of the video, please do so if you can afford it, and that's something you're of a mind to do, because I really would encourage you to do that. They're really great, important causes. So the donations that I have received so far to the Bail Project, I already mentioned Some Random Geek. Thank you so much, Some Random Geek. I got several anonymous donations after that. Thank you to everybody who was donated anonymously. I'm so grateful for that. Kevin Dool, thank you, Kevin. Flint Reed, thank you, Flint. Julie Christensen, thank you, Julie. John Forch, thank you, John. John Burns, thank you, John. Ensign Howell, thank you, Ensign Howell. And Eddie Stone, thank you, Eddie. Those are everybody so far who have donated to the fundraiser for the Bail Project. I am super grateful to all of you for doing that. I really appreciate you. It's awesome. And please, anybody, if you're able to and you feel like donating from this point on, please do so. Oh, Carl Ellisinophile just donated. Thank you very much. Leto is reminding us that it is the anniversary of the Pulse shooting. Will you say something about it, please? Yes, absolutely. Well, I mean, I don't know why this was controversial at the time, but I mean, it was a hate crime. I remember people arguing about it. I mean, the Pulse shooting was so awful, and it just is I think it's a mark of how totally fucked up our gun violence problem here in the United States is, that it's just sort of blended into the background. It's one of the ones that you mentioned. You know, like you can't just say the Pulse shooting. I mean, we will say it today because this is the anniversary, and it's a shame that we should be mentioning all of them individually, because they're all crimes and they're all atrocities and they're all tragic, awful losses of life that should have been prevented. But you know, there have just been so goddamn many that it's like you mention the Pulse shooting and you mention it as just one item in this laundry list of shootings that have happened over the last 6, 7, 8 years, and it's awful. It's terrible. You know, those people were victims of a hate crime, and casualties of our incredibly fucked up gun culture that there's no excuse for, that has to be fixed. You know, that should have been fixed years ago, or we should have at least been taking measures to fix it years ago, and we're still not doing anything about it. You know, so thank you for mentioning that it was the anniversary, because honestly, I'll cop to this. I honestly didn't realize it. I forgot. So thank you for reminding me, so that I could think about it and say something about it. Harry Garrison just donated. Thank you very much. Yes, Ensign House says, as a gay man, we need to remember our black, trans, and LGBTQ brethren. Absolutely. Absolutely. 255 AD said, why did you edit out the middle of my question? I really wanted you to address the points about nonviolence being a kind of white privilege. Yeah, I did cut out that part. I cut out a lot of it because it was just an incredibly long-winded question, and I cut it down because just, you know, I didn't want to read that entire thing on the air. But yeah, your point about nonviolence being a kind of white privilege is well taken, and I agree with that. And I probably should have left that bit in, and thank you for mentioning it so that I could mention it during the show. Yes, I do think that that nonviolence and like committing to nonviolence and looking down on people who do resort to violence from time to time, I do think that's an example of white privilege, for sure. I think you're right. Crud Butts just donated to the Bell Project. Thank you very much. Yeah, and Ensign Howe makes a good point. Yeah, white people don't get attacked, or at least get attacked way, way less often than black people and other people of color. So yeah, I do think it's a form of white privilege, for sure. Deralta Trekkie asks, why are people so upset when you propose, hey, maybe we should regulate who gets guns and who doesn't? Because it's baked into our culture, because it's been so normalized for so many years that it's just a part of the American identity. For whatever reason, well, not for whatever reason, after decades of propaganda and cultural conditioning, we've come to regard the gun, or some of us have, a lot of us have come to regard the gun as the most powerful symbol of our liberty. And any assault on that is an assault on liberty itself. That's why. It's disgusting. It's grotesque. And incredibly counterproductive when you want to push for reform. And it's the same thing with police, by the way. The same thing with police reform. We have idolized and put police, just a generic police, like up on such a high pedestal that to suggest, you know, we need to drastically reform the police. We need to recognize that the police department in this country as an institution is broken and needs to be drastically rethought from the ground up. Like that. You know, well, but cops are our heroes. Like that, it's viewed as like an assault on our liberty, as an assault on our identity, as you're wanting to destroy something beautiful and sacred, when it's actually the opposite. But we've just been conditioned. You know, we've just been sold this narrative for so long. John Burns says, how do you feel about the fact that during the coronavirus outbreak, the largest mass shooting in North America has been in Nova Scotia? I'm not happy about that fact. Well, no, I'm not happy about it either. I wouldn't be, I wouldn't be happy about a mass shooting happening anywhere. Radical Bacon says, would you visit Chaz if you had the chance? Or Chaz? I don't even know what that is. So I can't say. Yeah, they're ultra tricky. So basically, the gun is good, the penis is evil. Well, I mean, I think we think the penis is pretty good too. Jeff Borowiak says Wonder Woman or Supergirl. You know, I think I've been won over to the extent by the Supergirl TV show that I would probably say Supergirl. Although, I mean, Wonder Woman is a great character too. And maybe I should say Wonder Woman out of respect to the great Denny O'Neil, who just passed away yesterday. I wanted to mention that, by the way. Thank you for inadvertently reminding me of that, Jeff. Denny O'Neil, who wrote actually one of the worst runs on Wonder Woman ever. Denny O'Neil wrote a run on Wonder Woman in the 70s where he took away her powers. And it's one of the most derided runs of a superhero comic in history. And his intentions were good, but it was a classic case of a man writing for a woman and thinking he was doing something positive and feminist, and actually ended up doing the opposite. And he eventually apologized and acknowledged that he completely got it wrong. But Denny O'Neil was a writer and an editor for many years. He worked for both DC and Marvel Comics, but primarily for DC Comics. He was best known for his collaborations with Neil Adams, and they worked on Green Lantern and Green Arrow, and also on Batman for many years. And Denny O'Neil is one of the most important, if not the most important, writers to ever work on Batman. And he just died yesterday, and the news broke today, and it's a tremendous loss. Denny O'Neil was one of my favorite comic book writers growing up, and that wasn't even when he was in his prime. Like, his prime was in the 70s, but I first came to know him and discovered him in the 90s when he was still working he was the editor of the Batman group of books for DC, and he was also writing occasionally for them. And I just loved him. I thought and his work was fantastic. And he was an incredibly, incredibly important voice in shaping Batman as a character over the last 50 years. So rest in peace, Denny O'Neil. Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. That's what that means. Okay. Yeah, sure. I would visit it. Yeah. I have no idea what that means. Yeah. Okay. Sure. The Seattle Commune, yeah. 255 AD says, 2 weeks ago, No Illusions did a diatribe about how the offensive shock comics on YouTube weren't really a part of the atheist skeptic movement. Is that a no true Scotsman? Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's bullshit. Of course they were. They might not, I will give him this. They were never a major part of the organized movement, but they were a major part of the community. Their voices were very well known. A lot of people in the organized part of the community knew of them, watched their videos, and agreed with a lot of what they said, and did not treat them as the toxic people that they should have been treated. So I mean, technically they were not really involved in the organized part of the movement, but to say that somehow they don't count, that they weren't really a part of the movement, that's bullshit. That's a cop-out. Of course they were. And the atheist movement and the atheist community did not take responsibility for that at the time, and I think in many ways still hasn't. So yeah, that's bullshit. That's bullshit. John Burns says, as part of defunding the police, there is a call for more money for people in the community to be part of solutions. Professionals from outside or promotion from within? I think probably both. And I think that's a great idea. Yeah. And just got a donation to the Bell Project from Ensign Howe. Thank you, Ensign Howe. Again, Carlisle the Cinephile says, how do you feel about the recent revelation that Daniel Radcliffe wrote the Harry Potter series? Yeah, isn't that weird? I think Riley Dennis posted on Twitter, said that, the most incredible thing about the Harry Potter series is that nobody knows who wrote them. There are these books that just popped into existence, and who knows? As far as we know, nobody wrote them. I thought that was pretty funny too. I've been very, very pleased to see how many of the actors in the Harry Potter films Because now Rupert Grint, I saw, made a statement earlier too. So now all three of the big three, Harry, Hermione, and Ron have all, or the actors who played them, have all come out and said, supportive things about the trans community and distanced themselves from what J.K. Rowling said. And that's been very nice to see. And people having fun with, oh, gee, isn't it weird how, we don't know who wrote these books or how, like you said, Daniel Radcliffe wrote these books. I think it's great. Some random geek. I'm very sorry, Father Shives. Father, should I go to my room for calling Dr. Babylon a bootlegger? No, I'm not. I just take it somewhere else. Like, I'm just tired of seeing you guys fight with each other. Like, I don't mean to chastise you. Like, I'm not like mad or anything. We're still pals. I still think you're great, but it's like, just go fight somewhere else. Like, I don't want to hear this, Isaiah. Oh, you're not being annoying. Do you think you're being annoying, Isaiah? I don't think you're annoying at all. Radical Bacon asked earlier, would I ever go on TikTok? I don't even know what I would do. I don't even know what I would do. Carlisle the Cinephile says, what did Emma Watson and Rupert Grint say? Emma Watson gave a really nice statement. Neither one of them did anything as lengthy as Radcliffe's, because Radcliffe actually wrote like a statement that was published. I think, was it by GLAAD that published his statement? But it was published by an LGBTQ advocacy organization. As far as I know, Emma Watson just posted some tweets that were stating the obvious, that trans women are women and trans men are men, and trans identities are valid, and anybody who says that they're not is doing really fucked up, harmful stuff. So hers wasn't quite as extensive as Radcliffe's, but it was still in that same spirit and very trans positive. And Rupert Grint basically did that, but even shorter. Just did sort of, the AV Club reported on it, and it was basically like, yeah, what they said, but they have all made statements, in support of the trans community, and rebuking or going against at least what J.K. Rowling said. Trevor Project. That was, yes, thank you, Harry. It was the Trevor Project for sure. And I don't watch TikTok at all, so I don't. Some random geek says Marty Abernathy is on TikTok. That's awesome, but I do not watch TikTok at all. I pay no attention to it. And Isaiah says, Enterprise D for me. Love that 80s feel to it. Nothing beats a hard day's work on the Enterprise D than going to the holodeck and hanging with my Valley girlfriend at the Galleria. Yeah. I think the Enterprise D is the ship that I would most want to live on of all the major Star Trek ships. I think it would be the nicest to live on. I think Deep Space Nine would be the most interesting, but I think the Enterprise D would be like the cushiest, the nicest place to live for sure. Eddie Stone asks, what streaming program do you use? I'm always really impressed at your setup. Well, thank you. I use XSplit. I've used OBS before, but I found that I like XSplit better. So I've been using XSplit pretty much exclusively to do streaming for a few years now. Some Random Geek says, what are your thoughts on Joe Biden saying we should fund the police more instead of defunding them? I think that is such a boneheaded suggestion. I wish Joe had not said that. I think a lot of what Joe has said recently has been good, but this proposal, I think what the number was, like 300 billion or 300 million more. I mean, there's some massive number to increase budgets to police departments. It's like, that's not going to fix this. Like, just throwing more, the police are funded enough. Like, they don't need more money. More money is not going to fix this. The problem doesn't lie in the money. I think it's just a hugely boneheaded move. It's basically saying, like, let's give more money to the police department, and then we'll just trust them to be able to identify these problems and fix them. When it's not working. Like, they've been doing that for years. It's not enough. It's not working. That's not going to fix it. So no, I completely disagree with that. And Vovacat17 donated to the Bell Project. Thank you very much for donating. I really, really appreciate that. Deralta Trekkie says, Linkara said, hey, Wonder Woman is simple. 3 words, spirit of truth. I just think that there is more to write than just that. What do you think? Oh, yeah, there's more to write than just that. I mean, I think if you want to have like a mission statement or like an essence of Wonder Woman, spirit of truth is a great starting point. But yeah, obviously the character needs to be more complex than that. David Colby, why do you need to invent a new ship that handles science when the Nova class, the objectively best class, exists? You're right. If I was going to do a Star Trek show like I described earlier, it would be a Nova class ship. You're absolutely right. Joe McClory says, if the police were not systematically broken and it is just some bad apples, do you think this would be the best time for good cops to turn in their bad apple coworkers? Yeah, of course. When else? And the fact that that is not happening en masse, I think, is an indictment of the system, because it means either that there aren't that many good cops, or that maybe good cops are turning in bad cops and it's not making any difference because the people in charge aren't doing anything about it. So either way, the good cop theory is completely invalidated as far as I'm concerned. And that's if the scenario was that, as you say in your question, if the police were not systematically broken, which I think we should all admit that they are. Yeah. Isaiah Taylor says, in my imagination, I live on the Enterprise D in my own quarters. It helps me cope sometimes. I can relate to that. When I was a kid, I used to pretend that I lived on the International Space Station. That was my fantasy escape. I lived on the International Space Station for a while, and then there was another period where I pretended that my bedroom closet was actually the hatch into a rocket ship, and my bedroom was in the gantry that was attached to the rocket at the point of the hatch. That was how I justified it. I just have an apartment. I live in the gantry right next to the rocket. Then I get in the rocket and I close the door and it separates and I can fly into space. Oh, sorry, Vovacat. Are you asking questions? I don't mean to ignore you. Thank you for your donation, but if you ask something, I must have missed it. I'm not as I always say, if you say something in the live chat and I don't see it or I miss your question, it's not on purpose. It's just that I just didn't see it. 255 AD says, Lugens obviously wants to separate his wing of the atheist movement from the edgelords. How do you do that with just insisting the edgelords don't count? Well, exactly, you can't. You can't pretend that they don't exist. I agree with wanting to separate from them, with wanting to shun them. But you have to take, if you're talking about the atheist community as a whole, like I feel like you have to take responsibility for the fact that these people were elevated, were allowed to thrive, were allowed to build careers and make a lot of money by playing to an atheist audience and playing to them with misogyny and racism and anti-LGBT stuff and right-wing talking points and all kinds of other fucked up stuff. And that they were doing this to an audience of atheists, and it had an effect on the overall mood of the movement. You know, they were not insignificant figures. Yes, they were not part of the organized movement very much. Yes, they didn't, as a rule, they were not invited to speak at conventions and stuff like that. But they were given a space to grow and thrive in the atheist community, and the movement needs to take responsibility for that. You know, you can't just say, well, they were never part of it. Yes, of course they were. Should they have been? No. Should they be now? No. But you can't just pretend that they didn't exist and that the movement had no part in allowing them to rise up and thrive. That's ridiculous. That's rewriting history. Flint Reed says, Greedo or Han, the public has a right to know. I'm a Han person, personally. I mean, what is there to attach to with Greedo? He comes in, he has one scene, he gets his ass shot. I'm just scrolling back up through and I'm trying to catch some things that I may have missed. I saw Radical Bacon said, so they've pulled down a bunch of Confederate monuments and a statue of Christopher Columbus nearby. Should we cart them to the water, or would that be too much effort? I mean, if people want to do it, I would love to see them get chucked into the water. That would be fantastic. 255 AD says they didn't begin construction on the ISS until you were around 17 or 18. No, they didn't, but it was talked about for many years. And actually, when I was a little kid, I remember getting a book that was based on sort of one of the proposals at the time. Yeah, it wasn't called, I didn't think of it as the ISS at the time. I thought of it just as the space station, but it was the same sort of concept that the ISS eventually became. It was modular. It had the big solar panels. There was a proposal for it that was published in a book when I was a kid called Space Station Freedom, that superficially looked very similar to how the ISS looks now. So yeah, it wasn't. Yeah, you're right. The ISS didn't actually it didn't come into existence until I was a teenager. But the idea of a space station like the ISS had been around for many years, and I used to imagine that I lived on a station like that. Oh, who shot first? Oh, Han shot first. Sorry, Flint. Yeah, Han shot first. Oh, Der Alta Trekkie says, anyway, gotta go, live long and prosper. Oh, thank you very much, my friend, and thank you for coming by. Plasma Burn Death, I did miss your question. Let me scroll back and see if I can find it. Siranuki says, and Columbus thought the harbor is Indian. Is India. Yeah, that's funny. That's really funny. DK Silo, what did I miss? Hi, Steve, love your content. Well, thank you very much. You missed most of the show. But that's okay. You could always go back and watch it if you really want to see it that bad. John Fort says, do you follow street epistemology? Not really. No, that's not really my thing. I'm not really a proselytizer in terms of atheism. At least not anymore. And I never really was on a person to person basis. Like I don't think there's a lot. I would much rather find ways to peacefully coexist with religious people and to establish, and maintain like a secular society where people of faith, of all faiths, and people of no faith like me, all have equal rights and equal, recognition under the law. And if we can get that, I don't really see the need to deconvert people or persuade people to atheism, Plasma Burn Death says, do you think we have a police industrial complex? What happened to demilitarize the police? It was the best way. Yeah, I agree. And by the way, Flint Reed donated to the Bell Project. Thank you, Flint. Yeah, I agree with you. I do think demilitarizing the police, whatever else we do, should be one of the first things we do. Yeah, I think. And is there a police industrial social complex? Yeah, I think there is one. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's so difficult to push and achieve meaningful police reform, because it's become this entrenched institution with tentacles all over the place. Yeah. And yeah, of course we should demilitarize the police, like immediately, as soon as possible. Michael J. Ingram, Steve, are you a Sliders fan? I watched it when it was on. Yeah. I was into it the first 2 seasons, I think, and then I kind of drifted away, but I remember watching it when it was on. I thought it was fun. Red Spiral Ray says, hey, Steve, what was your opinion about them pulling Dukes of Hazzard off TV back in 2015 after the shooting in Charleston? I supported it. I thought it was fine. I thought it was a good move. The Dukes of Hazzard is an extremely problematic show. And this is coming from someone who used to enjoy it a lot as like a goofy, funny action show. I totally supported taking it off the air. I mean, for Christ's sake, it's a show where, the star of the show is a car with a fucking Confederate flag on it. If that was a Nazi flag and it was portrayed as heroic, would we even be thinking about this? Would we even be talking about this? Of course not. No, I had no problem with it. Some random geek says, thoughts on John Boyega playing Geordie LaForge? Oh, hey. John Boyega would be a great, now we're getting back into casting like the reboot of TNG. Yeah, I think John Boyega would be a really good Geordie now that you mention it. For sure, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it would be awesome to have someone with his social conscience and his courage to speak out about political stuff with such passion involved in Star Trek, because that's what it's all about. Joe White says from Twitter today, update, the activists who destroyed the Christopher Columbus statue have investigated themselves and found no wrongdoing. Ah, that's hilarious. Well, that's a load off my mind. That's a load off my mind. Okay, everybody, everything's fine. The people who tore down the statue investigated themselves, and they determined everything was cool. I mean, if the cops can do it, why can't we, right? You know? Hey, I mean, can you imagine, in any other walk of life, can you imagine you're accused of wrongdoing and you're given the power to investigate yourself? Hey, Steve, you've been accused of murder. Oh, okay, I'll look into it. I looked into it. I'm innocent. Like, come on. BobaCat17 says John Boyega has different looking eyes, but you know, it doesn't matter. That's true. I mean, if we go with the classic Geordie makeup and he has the visor, you're right. We're not going to see the guy's eyes. Isaiah Taylor says, tell VovaCat17 I appreciate his country's contribution to World War II. There you go. Straight from Isaiah Taylor. VovaCat17, he appreciates your country's contribution to World War II. I think I saw some random geek mentioned earlier that it was your country that actually won World War II, which I think is there's a very good case to be made for that. And yes, some random geek, LeVar Burton is a classic. LeVar Burton is the best. LeVar Burton is awesome. 255 AD says, do you agree with the claim that LBJ only worked with MLK because he was afraid of more violent protesters? I mean, that may have been part of it. There was a rising black militant movement at the time. You know, so I think that I would be surprised if it didn't play a very important role for sure. I don't know if that was the only reason. I mean, LBJ did have a decent civil rights record for a white guy from the South. I mean, I'm not going to say that you know, he was Abraham Lincoln, or certainly I'm not going to say that, you know, he was, you know, as comparable to Martin Luther King in terms of civil rights activism. But and there were a lot of things that he did that were not good. But on the whole, I mean, he was not your typical racist Southern white guy. So I don't know if he had to be persuaded to do something about civil rights all that much. But yeah, I'm sure the looming threat of further violence did play a role. Absolutely. Red Spiral Ray says, I don't think you've mentioned it before, so I gotta ask if you think aliens are watching us right now and shaking their heads at the dumb apes. I mean, if they are watching us, that's probably what they're doing. Yeah. Yeah. Isaiah Taylor says, the Mir space station is my all-time favorite. Well, I mean, yeah, that was, I guess technically Skylab was the first, but Mir was the first, you know, long-term space station. Yeah. Mir was awesome. Nick Mainpa says, do you think we have ever had a president as reckless as we currently do? Nope. I do not think we have. Nope. I don't think so. I don't think we've ever had one as reckless, as irresponsible, as poorly suited for the job in terms of just basic competence. No, I don't think it's ever been. I don't think we've ever had a president. You could argue that we've had worse presidents in terms of policy, in terms of impact on the country or the world, but in terms of just their own personal qualities, Trump is easily the worst. Easily the worst. Like, to the point where there is no excuse for him ever getting within 1,000 miles of that office. He's clearly the worst. Yeah, Andrew Jackson was Andrew Jackson was a piece of shit. Radical Bacon says Andrew Jackson was pretty reckless. Yeah, and I don't think it's a coincidence that Trump admires Andrew Jackson, or at least claims to admire Andrew Jackson. I really don't know if he even knows that much about what Andrew Jackson actually did, but he just knows that Andrew Jackson is a name that he remembers. So he's like, Andrew Jackson, he was a great president. He defied the courts, right? Yeah. 255 AD says, what about the Iraq war protest being non-effective because it was too peaceful? Yeah, there you might be onto something there. And also, I too peaceful, and maybe there wasn't as much widespread public support for it because it was in the aftermath of 9/11 and we were still in our patriotism haze, you know, and there were a lot of people, whether it was nonviolent or violent or whatever, there just weren't as many people who were willing to throw in with it. Liam Foley says, do you think the majority of the GOP is racist, or is their rejection of Black Lives Matter and denial of systemic racism a psychological reaction to oppose anything liberals or Dems support? Well, I think the party as a whole, I mean, and as a matter of policy, it's racist. As a matter of policy, it's white supremacist. I mean, they don't call it that, but that's the effect of what they do and what they want to do. I think it's part of it is reactionary as well. But I think the party is racist. I think most people in the party are racist to a degree, at least, for sure. Vovacat17 says, is it possible that Trump is proven to be illegitimate and then legally removed from the list of U.S. presidents? Is it a right thing to do? Should someone else be 45? That is a really interesting question. Because here in the United States, there is no mechanism for doing what you just described. There is no contingency plan laid out anywhere in the law that tells us what to do if a president is determined to have taken office illegitimately after the fact, like after they have already served as president for a time. There's no mechanism to deal with that. So the most that we could hope for in terms of Trump is to have him removed from office, either by impeachment or by invoking of the 25th Amendment. But there, in terms of erasing his presidency and having someone else count as the 45th president, there's at present, there is no way that can happen. Should it happen if he is proven to be a legally illegitimate president? Yeah, I would have no problem with that. I think that would be great. But at the moment, and probably for the foreseeable future, like there is no legal mechanism that would allow us to do that. All we can do is remove him from office via impeachment or 25th Amendment. That's all we can do. He will always have been the president. Red Spiral Ray says, can we get rid of the movie Joe Dirt? As a white guy who grew up in poverty, I've been compared to that character and it always hurts. Well, when you put it that way, yeah. Yeah. And I've never seen Joe Dirt, but I assume that it's fucking terrible. It looked terrible from the commercials. I've assumed it was fucking terrible. Maybe I got that wrong. I don't know. Shives a Lion Dog says, the Whirlpool is a tour de force. I look forward to each episode. Thanks. Well, thank you. And I'll pass that along to my writing partner, Christopher, who helps me write that. He'll be happy to hear that as well. And thank you for your donation, Shives a Lion Dog. That's great. Just donated to the Bail Project. I really, really appreciate it. Yannick Muller says, hey, Steve, since Werner Herzog films like Aguirre were shot in multiple languages, what language are you able to watch in the U.S., the English or the German version? Asking for academic purposes. We have the English version. I haven't watched Aguirre for a long time, though. On the Blu-ray, it might be both, because I have a Blu-ray and a DVD, actually, of Herzog's Nosferatu, and it had both the DVD and the Blu-ray have both versions. There's the English version and the German version. So I would assume something similar is true of Aguirre. But yeah, the English version is widely available here. Flint Reed says, just do what we British do and name him Trump the Shitty, maybe like Ivan the Terrible, and let history remember him like that. That's a great idea. Crud Butts says, if Ferengi are satirical capitalists but merely comic villains, and the Borg are collectivists portrayed as horrifying villains, what does that say about TNG's actual view on capitalism? Well, I certainly don't think that, despite its utopian view of the future, I certainly don't think that TNG or Star Trek in general at least not up to this point, is anti-capitalist. I think the Federation Society that we see in TNG could probably best be described as capitalism without money, because a lot of other vestiges of capitalism remain, even though there is no more poverty and there's no more money in the Federation, at least not as we understand it. And there is no more requirement to work in order to live, and all of these other sort of oppressive aspects of capitalism as we have it. All of those are gone in the Federation, but everything else seems to work more or less the way it works in the capitalist system. Like there still seems to be private property in some sense. There are free markets. So I don't think that, and you're right. You're right. I mean, the super scary villains are the collectivists. The Ferengi are villains, but they're comic relief villains. And obviously they're very, very harshly, very sharply satirical of capitalism. And so, it's not as though Star Trek is trying to celebrate capitalism as we have it today, or make excuses for it. But at the same time, I don't think you can say that it's anti-capitalist either. Even though it is a very popular shorthand to say that it's utopian space communism, I don't think that's quite accurate either. Some random geek says Steve Shives just speaks Hans. That is as close to German as he gets. Yeah, I took German classes in college, and I have like no recall of it at all. Like, I literally do not remember. And I took Spanish too. I took Spanish. Nothing. I have no retention of it at all. But yeah, I do a very terrible German accented voice to do the voice of Hans Krieger. Queer Pro Black says, as a black person, thanks for your support. By the way, question, would you ever support a real Star Trek-like department in the U.S. government? Also, should Star Trek ever venture out of the galaxy, another galaxy? Well, thank you for saying that. I'm glad that I've been able to offer whatever little support that I have been. Would I love for there to be a real Star Trek-like department? Yeah, absolutely, for sure. And we have one already. It's called NASA. We should fund it. We should give NASA more money and more attention. But yeah, I'm all in favor of that. And yeah, a Star Trek show where they visit another galaxy, that could be cool. Yeah, I would very much be in favor of that. Okay, so I've been going for over 2 hours now, and at some point I need to stop. So, Vovacat, please read my last one. I will go back and find it and read it. And after that, I'm going to start wrapping things up. So just to let everybody know, if you have, if you want to if anybody has like some final donations they want to make or final questions they want to ask, queue them up now, and I'll try to answer a few more, and then we'll finish this. So Vovacat's last chat says, funny enough, Russia had its own Tsar fake Dmitry the First, which is literally how he is recorded in history. He was an imposter of Ivan the Terrible's dead son, still was officially a Tsar. That is really interesting. Yeah, I'm glad you asked me to go back and look that and find that. That's really interesting. I did not know that. Seal0626 says, I reckon the writers just couldn't think of how to portray a non-capitalist society because that's what they were living in themselves. Yeah, I think that's probably true. Yannick Muller says, I got to say Hans Krieger is really close to Werner Herzog and I love him. Yeah, he is close to Werner Herzog. He is. Because Hans is not, Hans has a bleak view of the world, but Hans himself is not like depressed or a nihilist. Like he's a humanist, and he does have a sort of bizarrely skewed sort of dark sense of optimism about him. He's not like, he gets very poetic about how bleak and dark and terrible things are, but he's not like a depressed person. And I get that from Werner Herzog too. Like he's always looking on the dark side and always asking these really disturbing questions about humanity and provoking all of these existential angsty questions. But he himself is not like a mopey, dark, depressing, person. I don't get the impression that he's like that. So yeah. Okay. Couple more. Oh, thank you, Nick. Nick says, I love you, Steve. Thank you very much, my friend. 255 AD says, have you figured I was trying to get you to address the parts of my question you skipped? I got my money's worth. Whether. Well, I'm glad that I addressed them, and I'm sorry that I skipped the parts. But again, like I ask when I put up the post calling for questions, like I do ask people to be as brief as possible in asking the questions. And, you know, sometimes people can't resist and they post these long screeds. And sometimes just for the sake of brevity, I will edit them. So if I edit it in a way that is not to your liking, I do apologize for that. But it's because like I do ask for brevity when you're writing the questions. And sometimes I do take it upon myself to edit them for the sake of the show. Yeah, Queer Pro Black says, sadly, NASA is being privatized. I agree. Yeah, I agree that that's sad. I wish that it was not like that. Trina Conrad says, your opinion of Star Trek Voyager is well known. I'm just wondering if you have any episodes that you find interesting, enjoyable. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, for sure. There are lots of Voyager episodes that I enjoy in various ways. I've said before, a couple of times, my stock answer when people ask me about Voyager episodes I like is I really like the episode The Thaw. I really like the first Q episode, Death Wish, I think is excellent. There are a couple of Voyager episodes that I really genuinely think are good, and others that I don't think are good necessarily, but have really, really interesting ideas, really, really interesting concepts. So yeah, there are several Voyager episodes that I do genuinely enjoy. 255 AD says, are Ferengi anti-Semitic? A little bit. Yeah, a little bit. I don't think intentionally, but they can be read that way for sure. I don't think that the writers meant it to be that way, but I think it's fair to read them that way. I don't think they're primarily anti-Semitic. Like I don't think they're so anti-Semitic that they should be taken out, that we shouldn't, be. But yeah, I see how people get there. Like I see how people get there for sure. Yeah. Okay. Eddie Stone says, Steve edited my post and it came across as more erudite than I otherwise would. Well, thank you. I'm glad that it worked out that way. David Colby, yes, The Thaw is a good episode, isn't it? The Thaw is a really good episode. The Thaw is like a good Star Trek episode, period. Not just a good Voyager episode, but a good Star Trek episode. Oh, Joe. Okay, this is going to be the last question. Okay, Joe McClory just said, least favorite Trek character, and it's so easy. I'm going to take the live chat off the screen now. It's so easy because my least favorite Star Trek character ever in any version of the franchise by a million billion light years is Lwaxana Troi. And I don't talk that much shit about Lwaxana because I know a lot of people really like her and a lot of people really identify with her or identify with like wanting a mother like her or something like that. So I don't want to make people feel bad by shitting on their favorite character, but boy, I hate that character. Oh God. I absolutely hate that character. I think she's a terrible character. I think Majel Barrett in that role is a very, very poor actor. And I don't like that character. I do not enjoy her at all. So Lwaxana is by far my least favorite Trek character. Bruce Bardem says, you can obviously do accents except French. Why? Because the French accent is, I can't do an Australian accent either. So, yeah. But anyway, okay, so I'm going to wrap this up. I want to remind everybody, if you haven't donated to the charity, to the Bail Project, please do so if you can, or to the Black Lives Matter DC Legal Defense Fund, which is linked in the description of the video. Also linked there is a website, a Black Lives Matter website that collects a bunch of different links to different resources that you can go to help the protesters and help to support what's going on as people push for change. And also a document put together by our pal Some Random Geek with charity links to a whole bunch of people who are friends of ours who maybe need a helping hand. So please avail yourself of all of that. If you have a few extra bucks to spare and you want to do something good with it, there's an opportunity to do something good with it, and I would highly encourage you to do so. If you are a fan of my work, you can go to patreon.com/Steve Shives to support what I do on this channel, and I really appreciate it, but because this is a fundraiser, I'm not going to push that too much, but just to remind you that it's there. I also want to remind you that I co-host a couple of podcasts. as part of the Let Me Listen podcast family, Late Seating, the movie review podcast where we review classic films. And our most recent episode of that went up last week, and it was our review of Alfred Hitchcock's classic The Birds. And the other podcast that I co-host is the Star Trek themed comedy podcast, The Ensign's Log, and our new episode of that just went up today, and it's a really, really awesome episode. So usually we do the episodes where it's my character interacting with the alien and Jason plays the alien. This time we did the reverse, where Jason's character interacts with the alien and I get to play the alien, and it was a lot of fun, and it turned out really well. I'm really happy about it. And it's a fun episode, and it's a really fun show. So if you haven't listened to the Ensign's Log, check out the Ensign's Log and Late Seating and all of the other great Let Me Listen podcasts by going to letmelistenpodcast.com or listening via the links in the description. You can subscribe via RSS, listen on your favorite podcast app. That's it, everybody. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for donating. Actually, let me do one more thing. I want to check something here. I made a note of how much the fundraiser was at before you all started donating tonight. And I just want to see how much more money we raised. So when we started, the fundraiser for the Bail Project was at $4,026. Now, as we were about to end the show, it is at $4,915. So once again, just as we did Wednesday, we have raised almost an extra $1,000. Actually, a little shy of $1,000 this time. Almost an extra $900, which I'll go ahead and round up to $1,000. But we've raised, basically, we've pushed it from $4,000 to the precipice of $5,000 just in the last 2 hours. I am so happy about that. I cannot tell you how tickled I am about that. So thanks to all of you who have donated to the Bail Project tonight. Summer Random Geek just did the math. We made $889 exactly up to now. So that's amazing. Thank you all so much. And yeah, I will be around. There'll be a new Trek Actually video going up next week, and I'll be back to do this live stream, another Ask Away, in 2 weeks. And who knows, maybe I'll do something. I'll do some other kind of live stream between now and then, and the Facepalm 5 that same week. We'll see how it goes. Live streams are fun. But yeah. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all for the questions. Thank you all for the support. Thank you all for donating to charity. It's been awesome. And take care of each other. Be safe. And I'll see you around. Have a good weekend, everybody.